Okay, so Runon's on a train, and my camera is already going nuts. So let me just sort out the camera before I even go live, because I can tell it's going nuts, because it's currently focusing on something over my shoulder. Hello, everyone. Merry Christmas. Oh, by the way, I feel like I should give you all a taster of the shirt I'll be wearing on Sunday. Just because, well, I saved this for Sunday for all of you because it's a Sunday before Christmas, and it seemed appropriate. So, just a quick, for the brew ships on Sunday, when we're doing alternate histories, this seemed appropriate. I just felt it seemed appropriate. Okay, for the brew ships on Sunday, this seemed appropriate. But today it's just the standard Rudolph Merry Christmas. Hello, everyone. So, welcome to what was realistically a dealer's choice. A dealer's choice. Lions, not Indefatigables. Hello, everyone, and you're getting a new truck. Well, that's always a good choice. That's always a good thing. Going by train to get a new truck? Yeah. I don't think that you've trained for what to do when I'm on the train. Runon, in the nicest way, I have survived with Fleet on a train. There is nothing you can chuck at me that I will not be able to deal with. That was an experience. When you're on a Japanese train, and you have with you someone who has the ability to keep silent of, well, he has no ability to keep silent. Love him dearly, but he really doesn't. And will literally hunt you down in different carriages to come and speak to you. When the rule on Japanese trains is you do not speak. You do not answer your phone. Now, as is normal when we do an alternate history, and I decided to do an alternate history because I felt like it, because it's a fun one for me to talk through. I went through all the questions, okay? And before we get into this, I'm going to explain a bit. This one was Dr. C's choice. Pick the patron suggestion from last year that you would have most enjoyed doing that didn't get the votes. And basically, BlackburnMaximus put this one. Alternate history, Dominion lines. The Dominion Indefatigables are instead proto 12-inch armed lions. New Zealand gets 1, Australia gets 2, and Canada gets 4. And I was actually happy to an extent that didn't get through. I was both unhappy because I thought it was going to be a good one, and happy it didn't get through because I wasn't sure how to get around the fact that the lions are actually ordered before the Indefatigables. Barring Indefatigable herself, the lions are ordered first. And the 13.5-inch guns are ordered first. In fact, realistically, it gets quite problematic to do these things. So, I adapted the question. Because, honestly, Australia and New Zealand, when they're making a decision, are choosing between lions and Indefatigables. And the case is made that the Indefatigables will be cheaper. We'll discuss the reality of this when we get closer to the point, but let me just say, they lied. They did. They lied. Now, Fleet is wonderful. I want to get and say Fleet is wonderful. It's just the one rule of Japanese trains is you do not talk on Japanese trains. They're all going, okay, if we sit far enough away, perhaps that'll stop him and it'll be okay. Because we were worried about him getting kicked off the train. Honestly, we were. We were worried he's going to get kicked off. Oh. So, Sunday as normal is going to be brew ships. It's going to have questions. There'll be questions at the end of today's video, as is normal, but there's a presentation at the beginning, as is normal for a Thursday. And I'm just waiting, before I start, I'm waiting for Twitch to allow me to actually log in. Because Twitch is currently being annoying. So that's why I'm not starting. Because I cannot check Twitch myself because it's not allowed me to log in yet. I know there are people talking to me on Twitch. Hello to the people who are talking to me on Twitch. Hello, Jonathan. Hello, Runon. Hello, Timu. I know you're talking to me on Twitch, but Twitch is not allowing me to log in. So I'm logging in again. I love Twitch. I love YouTube. I love both of them. They're both excellent things and give me a lot of fun. But I'm also going to make sure my phone is on silent, because it apparently is on noisemaker. Oh yes, it's allowed me to log in. And just check it's not tagging as restream or anything silly like that. No, it isn't. Phew! All working. So, as is normal with alternate histories, we're doing the actual history up until we get to the Shames book plug. Then the Shames book plug onward, we do the history. So, again, and I say this specifically for the two people who still complain they don't want to see alternate histories. I know I said I was going to talk about this Christmas, so I'm giving a heads up. It's regular history up to the Shameless book plug. It's alternate history after the Shameless book plug, and then it's questions at the end. So, basically, it's usually about, I usually aim for about 70 minutes, and whatever the time at the end to make up the full 3 hours. So, basically, just when you get to the Shameless book plug, skip an hour, and you'll probably miss the alternate history. Okay? Then you don't have to watch it. I do this, I'm as nice and as kind as I can be on this one, but I will warn you, I have been given as a present by my little cousins something which, when this office is complete, will be hung up prominently. Apparently, it fits me well. So, you know, that's coming. Right. No. I don't think they read the title. I really don't. With that being said, meet HMS Australia. Okay? In 1909, there is a conference. There is a bit of a naval conference / discussion amongst the Dominions about what they can do. And the idea is put forward that they can each invest in a cruiser squadron to defend their local areas. And each cruiser squadron will be led by a battlecruiser. Now, there is a large debate about whether they should have the next generation of cruiser killer battlecruiser or the next generation of battlecruiser killer battlecruiser. This happens. And basically the fundamental of the debate is, well, why, which saves us money, which best suits us for the role. And the whole point of this is because the Dominions are supposed to be paying more for their defense. Okay. Again, I know I've said this in a couple of videos recently, but the idea that it's something brand new, that there is basically one country which is funding the vast majority of maritime security around the world, is not an unusual one in history. Historically, there has been a guarantor, primary guarantor, for pretty much the last 230-ish years. You can actually go back a bit further if you want to. There has been historically a primary guarantor of maritime security that have taken lead when dealing with piracy, taken lead when dealing with issues at the sea, taken lead with dealing, all sorts of problems. There has been a primary guarantor. Now, for a long part of the period, that has been... Hello, you've come in. No, you cannot have my pizza.
He's brought his food.
That's good. He had food in here. Just lie down the Christmas tree and put it on that. Yeah. I do love the way you make sure you come in... Did that hurt? This is why I'm tempted to start banning you from lifting, moving, or generally touching things.
I might have a small bruise.
Carry on.
Carry on.
Your food and liquid is that way. Biscuits are above my head. You will get them after you've eaten your food. Anyway. So. Sorry for the interruption. But with that being said, and that being done, this starts to make sense. Now, the trouble is, the primary guarantor tends to get annoyed about this. At a certain point, they start going, hang on, why are we paying for everything? Okay, you all need to step up and do something yourself. Again, this is nothing new. This is one of the things I find most hilarious when I hear... on a certain topic, i.e. NATO defence spending and current affairs, when I hear UK politicians complaining about American politicians saying that Europe needs to step up and pay more, I go, oh, you should look what your UK politicians were saying about everyone else in the world in the 19th century. You really should. Because... one of the reasons why Britain is very happy that America's finally investing in a navy in the 19th century and don't consider it a problem like the German investment is because finally they can look after their own frigating selves. It's the same with Australia and Canada and all these ones. They're basically doing it because they want them to be able to look after at least their own local area themselves. Their own local area. That's all Britain's asking. Look after your own frigating backyard. We'll take care of the rest, but look after your own backyard and be prepared to do so. Now, believe it or not, these ships being ordered is the fruit of roughly 30 years of effort on the part of the Royal Navy and the British government and various politicians to get them to actually pay for something. This is also the product of dominionisation. One of the reasons why the Britain is going through the process of dominionisation, which actually leads to the Commonwealth, and is all the fact why we can point out that Britain will actually start decolonising in the 19th century, is because they want to spread the cost of defending the trading conglomerate that is the British Empire by having the Dominions pay for their local security. And they realise, due to an early experience, that taxation without representation is not a good idea. Don't they? They realise it. Again, the British Empire is kind of like Tony Stark. It tends to learn from some mistakes. Now, hello, gorgeous. Now, once we start looking into this and start going further, you find HMS Australia. Now, she is special, and I'm starting off her first because the Australians build her for themselves and run her for their own navy. When we're talking about other ships built by the Dominions, Malaya, and New Zealand, they are built funded by that nation, but are then basically run by the Royal Navy, because they're able to play the upfront cost, a capital bill, but they don't want to pay the running costs. And they will claim it's personnel and various other reasons, but ultimately they don't want to do the running costs. Hello, you're gorgeous. What are you after? Biscuits? You want a poodle treat? Now, Architect 96, Karen Treat. Who can blame them? So, the thing is, this is the point I'm making. No, this is one of the things as a historian I like to try and make the point of people is, there is really, whilst, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. In this case, it certainly does rhyme. I'm only halfway through my pizza, by the way. If anyone's asking, I'm halfway through. I'll finish it off when we get to questions. I've been out doing all sorts of things today. So, there we go. Average cost I put for an indefatigable, 1.5 to 1.6 million. We'll get those in a bit, theoretically. But then you'll see what I'll be talking about in a second once we get to the actual costs and once you get all the equipment and systems. Because one of the things the British did was they gave to the Australians and the New Zealanders and the Dominions the cost of building the ships, not of procuring the weapons as well. And then the costs of the Lions and Queen Mary, which are given, and Tiger, which are given to the British government, are given in all-up cost. Now, yes, this is standard to the procurement of the period, but the thing is that producing that data and that order does make sense, but it's, again, you never lie when you're dealing with politicians if you're Royal Navy. You just select which information you give them. So if you give them the full cost, they will have the full figures. And the full figures make it very close between the Lions and the Indefatigables as to which one you should buy. However, if you give the full costs of one and the shipbuilding of the other and leave out the gun costs, it looks a bit different. There's also some other fun things, okay? To an extent, these all have some more true boilers. They're all pretty much Yarrow-style boilers, okay? Yeah, we're going to be talking about engine production, etc., and who's building what and who's getting what. Indomitable is the last battlecruiser which has large tube boilers. We'll talk about those in a bit. But this is the question. Now, this is 8 13.5-inch guns. This is 8 12-inch guns. This has a actual broadside of 8 13.5-inch guns. This is a theoretical broadside of 8 13.5-inch guns. Practical broadside of 6 because no, you are not firing across the. You are not firing through that little space across the ship. You can theoretically do so. You are not going to in reality. This is 4 guns firing forward. This has theoretically 6, and 6 firing aft, and this is 2 firing aft. So there are advantages with the gunfire here, but here's the real point. If you are in a fight against another battlecruiser, you want to be in this one in the period it's built, not this one. This one is designed to beat up cruisers. It is what I would call the global maritime security maximum cruiser. That is what it's focused on. But they have differences, not just in armor, but in speed. 28 knots. 25-ish knots. There are differences going on here. Now, I would also point out that the answer to this question also creates other changes in scenario, because if we consider them, the Congo class and when they're ordered, and we'll be talking about other changes, which will go on. The Congo class, when they're ordered, and they're all armed with their 14-inch 45s and all those things, they are ordered in 1910. They are, to an extent, contemporaries of the Lions. I would say they are slightly modified contemporaries of the Lions, but they are contemporaries of the Lions, and originally 27.5 knots to the Lions 28 knots. Now, stop it. Now, again, if you are building more of these, and if this build structure changes, does that change the Japanese perspective on what they need? No. You can't keep demanding things. You're going to get fat and podgy. Not happening. You have eaten your food, though. Just sorting something out. Now, when we consider all this, you're probably sort of comfortably glad to hear that, Channel Lord. Now, when we consider all this, you literally lied down for a second and then started back with it. Stop it. When we consider all this, when we consider the realities of the situation, these things are also bought with that in mind. I would argue in some ways the reason the Royal Navy is recommending battlecruisers to Australia, to New Zealand, and is recommending battleships to Canada is because of the strategic situation they're in. And the Royal Navy is honestly probably thinking, well, if we give them Indefatigables, A, they can afford it. B, we don't want the next two Indefatigables. We really don't want any more of them. We want to move on to something else. And honestly, them ordering them makes a stronger case for us having more powerful ships because, realistically, the Royal Navy should have the most powerful ships out of the Royal Navies. Shouldn't it? I can hear that debate's going on under discussion now. There's also a few other discussions going through. A lot of the Royal Navy at this point, and a lot of the work is going to be going through people like George Thurston, who are doing the practical designing of some of the ships and some of the naval architecture of the battlecruisers especially. There are others who are the DNC, who are, of course, taking a lead, but you can start to see features coming through of other architects and other designs. But, and this is the big glutimus at this point, the reality is, again, which one you're recommending depends on what you're expecting. If you're expecting New Zealand and Australia to never have to deal with more than a cruiser threat, this makes sense. If you're expecting them to actually have to face something larger, suggesting someone might get something more powerful, this is the thing you go for. And I would argue, if you were looking at future-proofing, if you were looking at the likely future development, not just the immediate here and now, but looking into future development, realistically, the Lions would have been a better option to push for. A much better option to push for. And yeah. I would say also, again, someone will probably going to put something I spotted already coming in the chat before I got to it. There is, to an extent, the advantage of the range with the Indefatigables. But again, you can build a slightly modified line with a slightly longer range. That's not exactly going to be difficult. But also, realistically, 6,700-ish nautical miles is nothing to be sniffed at, as Indefatigables go, but neither is 5,600 nautical miles of the Lions. It's a, I think roughly, and again, I'm checking my notes as well, like I can see in the chat, I'm checking it the same as what's in the chat, because I know John South and Knight681 are having a nice chat about this one. It's 1,080 nautical miles difference in range, which can seem like a big amount. It can do. But with a higher top speed, and with other abilities, this is not necessarily the bad thing. And again, this is a period when the Royal Navy has a lot of coaling stations. So, one of the points you have to remember is these are coaling station ships and coaling ships. And there are lots of coaling stations for the British to draw from, the Royal Navy's to draw from. So they have that advantage, to an extent, built in. Then let's look at the build schedule, because it's always worthwhile looking at the build schedule, and don't take this the wrong way. I'm hoping this is large enough for you to read. I'm going to expand it for you all to be able to look at. But that means I have to start playing around with things. Now, the build schedule of the Royal Navy had started off with the Invincibles. And, well, they'd been built first in a bit of a surge. 2 with Yarrow Parsons turbines, 1 with Babcock and Wilcox engines and Parsons turbines, in terms of their boilers. And engine builder basically means the boiler construction. You'll notice quite a lot of the shipyards get Yarrow. Some get Fairfield, John Brown. Again, Indomitable is the last of the battle cruisers produced with large tube boilers. From that point onwards, they're pretty much all getting small tube boilers of variations. With that being said, please notice, both Lion and Queen Mary and Lion and Princess Royal are ordered before New Zealand and Australia. And I've listed their dates as ordering. It isn't actually August 1909, but that's when they make the decision in the conference which one they're going for. They ordered them later on than that, and there's a bit of argy-bargy discussion. But realistically, their decision is made at the conference in August 1909. So I have dated it for the conference of 1909, or August 1909, because that's the date which matters. Now the thing is, that kind of ruins the run of construction. And it means you end up with 6 12-inch battle cruisers, 2 words, and 4 13.5-inch battle cruisers, 1 word, built in that run. But the thing is, again, look at those prices in reality. In reality, the Lions are roughly 2.1 million. New Zealand is 1.779, so near as off might not make us no difference, 1.8. And Australia is 2 million. So we're talking roughly 320,000 and 100,000 pounds difference, which is a lot of money. I'm not saying it's not a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But it's not so different that when you're looking at those variations, you're not going, okay. There are options here. There are other options. I'd also say there is more that needs to be considered in terms of capabilities. Channel, if the battlecruisers were getting small tube boilers from the Indefatigable models, why weren't they available for the Qs? They are. I talked about it. They are getting smaller tube boilers. They're not small tube boilers. Okay, let me put it this way. Yarrow boilers are producing what they're calling small tube boilers from a lot earlier on. I've done this discussion. I did a whole comment back to Paul from Chicago. And you've got destroyers, you've got all sorts of things coming through with small tube boilers, including cruisers. And there are battle cruisers which are getting smaller and smaller tube boilers. They're not small tube boilers as we would historically position them, but they are getting there. Yarrow are leading the charge. So when you see Yarrow boilers, they are the smallest tube boilers that you can probably buy at that time. Okay? But they might not be what we tend to refer to as small tube boilers. They're getting ahead there. Now, the thing is, this is the interesting thing when you get to the Queen Elizabeths, because realistically, you could have gone with small tube boilers. You could have gone with them at that time because they have been in everything else. But as we said before, the Royal Navy has a policy. You only make 3 major changes between each class. And the Queen Elizabeths were getting higher speed. They were getting an 8-gun arrangement. They were getting the 15-inch guns. They are having sufficient enough changes that, frankly, going small tube boilers as well in something else. Okay, I hate Google. I've just seen a question coming in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the bot. Okay? Get the bot going. Give me a second and I'll turn it on. And then people can store questions in there. Yeah, wait till the bot's actually started before you start putting questions in for the end, etc. So they don't get lost, because YouTube has a habit of losing questions. And that's worrying me. Yeah. Questions are now open, so if you do the same trick as with brew ships, the questions are open and are working. And I will monitor them going into there. Okay. So, again, the prices are increasing, but it's only when you get to Tiger that they goes up dramatically. And this is another point I tend to make about Tiger. Tiger is a proper battle cruiser. One word. And there is a reason for that. You start looking and going, this ship is different than the rest. There is a reason she has gone up £500,000 versus the others, and that's a lot more than frigating inflation. And again, Fisher, there are questions you can put up, but in a nice way, the Australians pay £2 million for Australia. Look at the price of a Lion. Fisher, 1906. Look at the price differential between a Lion and HMS Australia. Are you going to tell me that 90 grand is going to break the bank for the Australian government? I don't think it is. So this is the point I'm making. You know, again, I'll expand this out for people to be able to see. If you look at the prices, Fisher, and everyone else look at the price differential, you sort of go, Lions 2.09 million. Australia cost them £2 million. As it worked on YouTube. Ouch. Is it working on YouTube? Stop it, Raleigh. No. You get to come in here. You're part of everything. Looks like it's not working on YouTube. Okay. Give me a second, I'll just fix that. He's got a whole lot of ones which I did ages ago, but not anymore. Give me a second. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, it's still not picked up this one. Ah, why YouTube? Why are you so annoying? Why are you doing this to me? Okay. Alright. Oh, stop being so annoying. Why do you do this, Streambot? You're supposed to make my life easy, and you don't make it easy. You make it difficult. And you're being annoying, Streambot. You are being very annoying. Okay, so I've just worked out what I have to do. And I'm hoping it doesn't delete the videos off YouTube, but I have to delete them. I have to delete them out of the bot again manually because it's not auto deleting them. But the thing is, should be working. Should be working. Didn't have a function that it's supposed to have a function that does it automatically. Whether it does or not do it automatically is a complete different matter. And Streambot has then decided to crash and turn itself off. Yeah, that's good. Whole load of tests received. So now, bot is now working. I have basically beaten it around the head. I do apologise for taking the time to do that, but I've done it. It's working now. So I won't lose any questions during the live, because this is the thing. I don't like to lose the questions from YouTube or Discord or Twitch or any of the questions that come in during the live, so they won't be lost. Now, with this all being said, you have HMS New Zealand. Now, HMS New Zealand is probably one of the most lucky ships in the Royal Navy, and if you consider its service in World War One. It is incredibly lucky how it's still alive. Its captain does have to wear what's called a plinth, a Maori skirt, and various other things, but it does well. It does well. I'd also say, for New Zealanders, this is even less of a problem than the Australians. Yes, ultimately, it theoretically costs less for the New Zealanders to buy this than it does for the Australians to buy Australia. But considering they're not going to be crewing it, or logistically supporting or sustaining it, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for the British if they get another 13.5-inch gun ship. So this is, again, one of those scenarios where, yeah, it's nice to have the longer range, and in some ways the Indefatigables are built with the longer range in mind, because if you consider their range of 6,690 nautical miles versus the Invincibles, which was 3,090 miles, that is a massive step up in range. A massive, mahoosive step up in range. And it's useful for their role, but then we've got Lions, which come in afterwards, which are 5,600 nautical miles. We have Queen Mary, which comes in after that, which is 5,600 nautical miles. We have Tiger, which comes in after all of those, which has... how do I put this politely on her range? Okay. She carries 3,900 tons of fuel oil and 3,400 roughly tons of coal in HMS Tiger, which she was able to consume roughly 1,200 tons of fuel, whether it's coal and oil, a day to maintain 24 knots all day, which is 3,300 nautical miles. Roughly. And I would like to point out that before people start thinking this maths comes from me, this maths comes from a guy called Parkes. And when we say Parkes, we of course mean the Oscar Parkes British battleships Warrior to Vanguard, who very nicely has produced a lovely book back in, oh good god, the version I have is 1990, but I think there was an earlier version published a long time before that. And in it is a whole list of stats for Tiger, which we basically take as the God's honest Tiger. Excuse. Now, compared to that, the other ships of the time, roughly at the same time, would have done 2,400 nautical miles, steaming at the same speed. That tells you how long her range is. She's got roughly 50% more range than most of the others. She can do 3,300 nautical miles. Okay, well, 2,400, so 900 miles, so over a third more range, okay. So, realistically, she can probably do the same as, Queen Mary. And if you added on the range of, let's say, if you took the 5,610 miles and you divide it by 3 and add on the 10 times by 4, you get a very healthy, and I will say this, a very healthy range. You get a range of roughly 7,400 miles. Nautical miles, that is. Which, again, is beating the Indefatigables. So, New Zealand's a very good ship. She's a very good typifies what they're able to get. You know, it's a very honest approach actually, because it's basically the Royal Navy going, okay, we'll base this out in New Zealand. We'll pay the running costs. You've paid the procurement costs. It'll defend your interests. It's your contribution to the cruiser squadrons because it's what you can afford to do, and that's sensible. That is a very sensible action for the Royal Navy to go with. And again, it adds another ship in. And that's the point to really think about it. These two ships are 2 extra ships being added into these builds. Which again, it means you're ordering so much more ships over that time period. Theoretically, you've ordered 4 battlecruisers the British Empire have de facto in 1909. You've ordered 4. That's quite a bump when you consider the plan for the year was 4 battleships and 1 battlecruiser. And then 1909 ends up with having a contingency order listed, which is with 4 more battleships and another battlecruiser. One of the things we often forget about the We Want 8 campaign is it's run twice. Okay? The We Want 8 campaign, the louder version, is what orders the R-class battleships. Right? But there's an earlier one, which comes in 1909, when the government tries to get away with ordering 4 battleships and a battlecruiser. And they end up having to order 8 battleships and 2 battlecruisers. Technically, it's the We Want 10 campaign. Mm-hmm. Anyway, with that being said, moving on. This is HMS Lion. Now, what is the differential between her and the Indefatigables? Because, honestly, Lion is, to an extent, even Admiral Fisher starting to admit that the world is getting scary, and the odds are that British battlecruisers will have to fight other battlecruisers. They got 12 capital. Yeah, well, technically, if you add on the Australian-New Zealand one, yes, we got 12. So, yes, it was a we want 8, we settle for 12 campaign. That was an interesting year. But leaving that to 1 year, and 2 of those ships are Lion class. That's the 2 Lion class battlecruisers are part of that order. And the Lions are pretty much, as said, they are Britain realizing our battlecruisers are going to have to fight other battlecruisers. Because, traditionally, the battlecruiser is built to take out the largest enemy cruisers. And when you are ordering the Invincibles, there is nothing bigger than the Invincibles. Hence, they're called the Invincible. The trouble is, Admiral Fisher repeatedly forgets the fact that other people have shipyards. And can build ships. It's a small, minor flaw in the man, but it's not his worst flaw by any stretch of the imagination. But it is a flaw. It is a significant flaw. And the problem is that the Germans are ordering various interesting ships. Okay. They had the experience of the Blucher. That was a bit of a letdown. And so they quickly went for, and it's worthwhile considering this, they quickly went for, after that, the von, what's it called? Yes. Oh, brain has died on me. Von der Tann. Yeah. They quickly go for the Von der Tann. But the Von der Tann is laid down in 1908. Please note that. The Von der Tann is laid down in the same year the Indefatigable is laid down and ordered. And so the British will suddenly go, oh, there could actually be a battlecruiser we could end up fighting. And then they respond with the Lions. Now, there's an interesting discussion about this, because there are a fair number of people who will place that the reason for the Lions being built is the Mock class. And I can understand that. I can understand that reasoning. After all, they are laid down in January and August 1909. And the Lions are ordered in April and July 1909. But honestly, the Lions had been under design longer than the Moltkes had been known about in Britain. Because they were the next generation, because the von der Tann has shown that the Germans and others are going to build battle cruisers. Other people are going to build battle cruisers. Okay, the largest cruiser we're going to fight now is going to be another battle cruiser. We have to work from it. And von der Tann is in many ways the most battle cruiser of what the Germans build. It really is, of what the Germans build. The von der Tann is also, I think it's their, from memory, it's their fastest. It's their, it's not their fastest, but it's the fastest for the time. Yeah, the one which has the most speed advantage is the von der Tann. It's 24.8 knots. It's the only time that they really have an advantage over British ships, because the British ships can do 25 knots and von der Tann can do 24.8, and it's a case of she's more armored than them and she's close enough in speed that frankly it's a nil fight. But yeah, von der Tann. Then you have the Moltkes. Then you have, well, Seydlitz. And then the Flingers. And to an extent, the British aren't building to counter the German battle cruisers. They're building to counter what they believe the German battle cruisers are going to be, should the Germans build them. I know, it's very disturbing for you poor Lions. Every time I talk about Lions, you think I'm talking to you. So, yeah, the Lions are not built to counter the Moltkes so much as they are built to counter the British impression that the von der Tann has shown that the Moltkes are coming. And realistically, this is the point at which you could again justify more. Because here would be the point I would be making if they were really being built to counter the Moltkes. What do the Germans have a habit of doing? They have a habit of sending their two of their most powerful cruisers to the Far East to the China station. That is where the Scharnhorst class are. Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, those wonderful armored cruisers that fight at the Battle of Coronel and the Falklands and are really good armored cruisers for their time. They're over in the China Squadron. They're over in the Far East. What would replace them on station? Probably it's going to be the next pair of large cruiser-class ships, right? Well, there's only one von der Tann. There's only one Blucher. The next two are going to be the Moltke, isn't it? The next two will be the Moltke class, because, let's be honest, and I know I said it's a lot, but Moltke and Goeben are the next pair. And they're going to be commissioned in 1911, 1912. You think Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were realistically supposed to be heading back 1914, 1915 anyway? It makes sense that that's where Moltke and Goeben would go, to be the next two big ships in that station. So it may, in simple terms, you could argue the Lions would be counter to them if they'd gone, right then, so they're going to build a pair of ships next. We know there's a pair coming. We know longer term those pair are going to end up in the Far East. So if we make sure Australia and New Zealand have ships already assigned to them, which are capable of fighting them, then their cruiser squadrons will be able to do the job they're supposed to be able to do. It makes sense. It makes sense. But no one was really looking that far forward. So whilst the Royal Navy's building the Lions with the idea of countering what they think's coming, they're arming up New Zealand and Australia with ships which are basically warmed over improved Invincibles. Improved first generation battle cruisers. Not necessarily the most sensible idea. Not realistically the most sensible idea. With that being said, we've reached the shameless book plug. As usual, I'll try and answer a couple of questions while I'm in the shameless book plug, but I'll say thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, supporting the channel. Sorry for the issues earlier with the system. I'm not sure if I've got all the questions anyway because of the bot playing up, so please make sure you submitted the questions properly. First question, which is not a test. Wayne 12 Science Tech. Assume 7 more timers. How much cost reduction do you think? In this period, you're going to get a bit, but not much, because they're not going to be churned out from the same yard. You've got too many yards, you're going to build them too quickly. You're not going to build a series of 7 ships at the same yard. You're going to be building 7 ships at the same time, or roughly over a couple of ordering periods. So they're probably going to stay roughly the same. There might be some reductions because of the sheer number you're ordering, but it's not going to make much of a difference. From Google a lot. I hate Google a lot. That seems like it's almost a knighthood title. For the post-World War I treaties, does a larger force of 13.5-inch gun battlecruisers mean the agreed force levels is higher, or does a shorter World War I mean no treaties? It depends on how it impacts things. I have very much... I basically have taken this as an alternate history through to Dogger Bank, and I'm limiting myself there, because how things work is going to be very different as they go on. Basically, up until Dogger Bank, it's probably not going to change that much, other than if we consider when Goban is running and is being chased. Historically, she's chased by Indefatigable and Indomitable. That's not really going to change. So I thought, well, if Indefatigable and Indomitable are probably still the two chasing her, that's not really going to change things. However, there is the chance that if you have more 13.5-inch ships in service, that one of them is out there because they're useful. Chandra, if there been roughly 10 Lion class, would Queen Mary and Tiger have been cheaper to build? The odds are Queen Mary and Tiger don't get built. If you have 10 Lion class, why do you need to build that many battlecruisers? Why does Britain need that many battlecruisers at that point? That's a squadron and more than a squadron of battlecruisers. You have 10 Lion class. If you have 10 Lion class, that's more battlecruisers. You have more Lion class than the Germans have battlecruisers. In fact, they get 3 deflingers in commission total, 2 of them, Motkers, Seydlitz, Von der Tann. So you almost have as many battlecruisers in service with the Royal. 10 Lions would give you almost as many battlecruisers in one class as there are battlecruisers in the whole world by other powers, because there are 7 German ones and the 4 Japanese Congos. So there are 11 other battlecruisers in the world, and you've got 10 Lions. You're not going to build Queen Mary and Tiger under those circumstances. You're concentrating on a battle fleet. You're only building 10 of those Lions if there is a significant uptick in threat to justify it. And then if you're building that many Lions, you're building multiple Queen Marys and Tigers. But again, it's not really going to have an impact much on their cost because of the way they build them. They're not building them in series. It's not like... If you consider today, we basically set up a factory. We set up a shipyard and we almost factorize it. Okay, this shipyard is going to turn out these ships in series. In this period, they build in parallel. So it's multiple yards building it. So you do have some cost reduction because of you ordering so many, but not that much because it's multiple one-offs rather than a series. And Architect 96, regarding Britain being happy US getting an actual fleet at a time, at what point country getting a large fleet will be seen as a threat? Would it be percentage of RN or something else? It depends on how it's marketed. The Germans were very public with their marketing in terms of what Turbis was saying, that it was built for, to humble the Royal Navy to an extent, and it was built with the Royal Navy in perspective. And plus, the Germans were very close to Britain, and they were combining with being a very large European land power with being a very large navy. All these combinations added a lot of heat to that development. With the Americans, as I've said before, there is a qualitative race and a quantitative race in terms of dreadnought construction. The qualitative race includes the Italians, the Japanese, the Americans, and the Brits, with honourable mention to the Austro-Hungarians. Not the Germans. Why are the Germans not in the qualitative race? Because for them, every time there's a qualitative jump, it pushes up the cost of the ships. And every time it pushes up the cost of the ships, they come that much closer to having a fight with the army for funding. And eventually it's the fight with the army for funding for the new generation ships, which actually costs them the naval race, and is why they'd pull out naval race, because they can't keep affording it. And realistically, that is the problem for them. If the naval budget starts to get to the point it's starting to impede the army budget, they're in trouble. So this is why a lot of people are going, okay, what would Germany do? The problem for Germany in keeping up is Germany has the ability to keep up in terms of the industrial might. It can build ships. Can it build ships of the same quality and in the same quantity and afford to devote that much of its budget to that navy for that? That is a whole other question. Because if it goes for the same quantity to the same quality it's already building them, it's trying to build them, but with the same steps up in advantage in terms of firepower and other things coming in, then yeah, it's fun. It becomes expensive because that's the big problem for the German Navy, for the Kriegsmarine. It's the cost versus the army and the fact that they start interfering with their budget. So, the Germans have some wiggle room, but it is not much. It is not much, because, as said, the German ceiling is not what they can produce, it's not what they can do technically, it's what they can do before they start interfering with the army's budget. Because the army wins the politics battle. And that's because of the French and the Russian armies and all the other commitments they have, so yes. The main thing this might cause, and we'll be talking about this, but it's basically before you're all jumping down questions, which are lovely to jump down, but we haven't even got into the discussion of the alternate history yet, so no. 10 Lion class, no. I don't think anyone's building that many. And that is the thing also, the Germans can't really spam ships to the same extent the Royal Navy can. That's their problem. Okay, so, under this scenario, things change a little bit. Things change a little bit. Just a tad, but a little bit. We have the British, basically, the last 12-inch battlecruiser is Indefatigable herself. From that point on, they build 4 Lions, and they build Queen Mary and Tiger. I've put them in as one-off ships afterwards, because that still makes sense than building them at those time periods and ordering them as part of their programs. But this means that you are going to get a massive delivery of ships. And I even put them up. I budgeted 2.1 million for each of them, but honestly, again, if you consider they're being built in Devonport, Vickers, Fairfield, John Brown, I did consider changing them to Yarrows and Parsons turbines. They probably should be. They probably would be, but you know, we'll leave that to one. I'll leave that to one side. They still get built at the same place as they did historically. They can be built in those places. There is a differential between the size and the scale of ships, but it's not enough that it's going to stop them being able to be built there. And yeah, you end up with 4 13.5-inch gunships being ordered in 1909. And that immediately becomes a bit of a problem. Because the British can build that. But that means you end up with roughly 2 batches of 2. Two batches of 2. You have Lion and Princess Royal, ordered in April and July. But the trouble is they were already mucking around the design even by that point. And the thing is, the ideas that lead to the Queen Mary modifications come quite soon. They come quite soon. And again, you're adding in another batch of jump ships. Again, remember that free changes thing. So you could end up with Lions Batch 1 and Lions Batch 2. Where Lions Batch 2 in New Zealand and Australia have another set of changes in them, which puts the British battlecruisers forward a generation development. We'll talk about this as we go on, but it's something to bear in mind. Because if you have them jumping forward a generation development, that's going to have an impact on other ships. That's going to have an impact on other options. And again, the Royal Navy is incredibly conservative in their development. Pretty much everything that goes into capital ships, whether they're battleships or battlecruisers, has been tested on other things usually first. And usually, again, they do a maximum of 3 changes between each generation. 3 changes. No more than 3. I'd say 3 significant changes. There are, of course, some minor ones as well, which I didn't. But 3 changes. So you've got to deal with that as a reality. This is going to be their batch 2 Lions. They could be ordered exactly the same as as the other Lions. They could be exactly the same. But seeing as even Australia and New Zealand were not exactly the same as Indefatigable, they had some changes. I doubt it. I doubt it greatly. So in this timeline, you've got 4 Lions of some kind coming in, and they're all 13.5-inch gunships. This is if the British keep to this build order and this build structure. Worthwhile thinking about, but it's if they keep to it. Now, there is going to be the German response. Now, I've already mentioned there's also likely the Japanese response. My impression is if the British are doing this, and if Australia and New Zealand are getting 13.5-inch gun ships, whilst yes, the British are allies, the Japanese might be slightly more worried about their Congos. And being 14-inch gunships does give them a small advantage, but they might be more worried about them having enough. There is a temptation, I think, there that the Japanese might want an extra couple of vessels. Mainly they have their decision-making, and they are looking at 8 fleets. So the thing is, you might see the Japanese ordering another batch of Congos. That could have interesting follow-ons, or ordering another set of ships earlier, because they've got 2 larger threats sitting in their area. 2 threats, which, let's be honest, the difference between a 13.5-inch gunship and a 14-inch gunship is not enough that you're going to feel secure. And whilst I don't think the Japanese will head for anything larger, I see lines already suggested a 12-12 fleet. I think it'll still be an 8-8 fleet. So, in many ways, that is limited by what they can sustain in terms of personnel and cost. But they might want to push faster into those fast ships. There's also going to be the scenario for the Americans in that they might actually push into the 16-inch guns or try and push the 16-inch guns earlier, because now there are going to be 13.5-inch gunships sitting in the Pacific. And there's going to be a lot more. There's going to be 14-inch gunships with the Japanese, with British 13.5-inch ships. And that's a lot more status. Okay? You have to remember, Orions were, whilst we remember today the Queen Elizabeth as the super dreadnoughts, the Orions with their 13.5-inch guns were the original super dreadnoughts. That's what they market as, because they had the big 13.5-inch guns. Every time you have a gun leap, a gun jump, that is a status increase in the time period, and very much in a period where they are obsessed with the size of guns. That's what the size of guns is going to have an impact. Now, for the Germans, well, historically they max out their construction. They pretty much are constructing as much as they can build. But there's a problem. If you consider Seydlitz, when she's ordered in March 1910, she's commissioned in May 1913, and when she comes into service, there'll be three 13.5-inch gun ships in service. And the Deflingers, they are ordered in 1912, and the Flinger commissions just before Tiger. She comes in just before Tiger, realistically. But again, you'd be sitting there going, so you have Moltke, Goeben, Seydlitz, and, Von der Tann and the Flinger. So 5 ships. And the Royal Navy has 6 13.5-inch gunships alone. In terms of force generation, whilst, yes, you can pick your battles, you're in a bit of an issue there. You've got a bit of a pickle. And that is a big problem for the Germans. I would argue for the Germans, if they're going to be caught in a scenario where, I wonder if they even go down the Flinger route. The Flingers are ordered in 1912. Let's be honest, by 1912, in this scenario, you're going to know what's coming from the British, and there are a lot of battlecruisers coming. Realistically, the British have ordered Tiger before you ordered the Flingers are ordered. Okay? So you're looking at yourself going, is it sensible to get into a battlecruiser fight with them? Is it sensible to get into a battlecruiser battle with the British? Is it sensible to put the money into them? Or do they go down the fast battleship route? Do the Germans try and make a break for the fast battleship route? I'm not sure, but I myself don't think the Germans necessarily compete in the same way. If they do, they're going to continue to be trying to make themselves into what is a fraction of the Royal Navy, and they're going to be having a trouble with that. Because, to an extent, they have a chance when the British go with Australia and New Zealand being 12-inch gunships. The British have, to an extent, written them out of the... have, theoretically, if you look at the Indefatigables and the Invincibles, the Invincibles are basically written out of what should be a sensible battlecruiser to be involved in major battles. And Indefatigables pretty much follow on that. But Lions onwards suddenly means you're very quickly putting together a solid squadron of very similar ships with very similar operating capabilities, and that's going to have an impact on operational capabilities. Whereas for the Germans, they've already got a fleet which is made up of bits and pieces, bits and bobs of ships. So what do the Germans do? I would say because people who are having the most direct impact on what's procured are Kaiser Wilhelm and Alfred von Tirpitz, and both of those have never had an original idea in their life when it comes to pushing these things through. I don't think they'll change from their historical policy. I think they still. I think he tries to demand something that can take on. You have to remember, one of the reasons why the Flingers are built the way they are is because the Kaiser is demanding something which can take on the British battlecruisers, and wants something which can match them. The interesting thing is going to be how he justifies it, because again, your problem is that the British have a lot of 28 and will have a lot of 28 knot battleships in this time, battlecruisers in this time. The Germans are generally getting slower. Because they're turning them closer and closer into fast battleships. That is basically what they're charging through. Then you have the British. Okay. And I haven't talked about the Americans because they don't really get involved in the battlecruiser thing, but at this point they might actually be looking at going, should we? The Italians and the French don't really either, but again, they'll probably be looking at going, should we? The really interesting thing is what has the Tiger and how this has knock-ons for other things and other operations, because, and I'm going to read this point out and then I'm going to discuss it in greater detail. Tiger herself could herself be very different. The British had experimented with designs as they built them, so Australia and New Zealand could be closer to Queen Mary rather than the Lions, as we said, which means Queen Mary would probably be closer to, well, Queen Mary could be closer to Tiger, realistically. She could be closer to Tiger, which wouldn't surprise me. And with that scenario, we then have differentials for Tiger. And this is where things get very interesting, because the main differential I could see, for Tiger is the 15-inch 42. She could otherwise be completely the same, but have the 15-inch 42 as her gun. And let me explain this one. She's ordered as part of the 1911-1912 program, but is laid down in June 1912. Why does this matter? Why does her being laid down in June 1912 matter? Because they're still mucking around the design up until she's laid down, pretty much. And they decide to develop the 15-inch 42 in January 1912. And you've already got 5 13.5-inch gun ships in service, so you can take the chance and go for a 15-inch gun. You can always fit a 13.5-inch gun in a 15-inch turret. There's also the fact that historically, the 15-inch 42 is first test fired in May 1914, and historically it is fitted to HMS Queen Elizabeth, which commissions in December 1914. And for those who don't know, HMS Tiger commissions in October 1914. Just 2 months before Queen Elizabeth does. This means there are a lot of options there. There realistically are a lot of options. So Tiger could end up being the first 15-inch gun ship. And that has an interesting scenario, because if the Queen Elizabeths aren't going to be the first ship with 15-inch guns, that suddenly means that's not a major change for them to have 15-inch guns. Follow me? That then means small tube boilers are increased likelihood as the major change for the Queen Elizabeths. Which means the odds are you end up with the Queen Elizabeths also being aimed for 28 knots, or as high as they can get them reasonably. So not 24, 25 knots, but closer to 28 knots. And of course, Tiger is a 28-knot ship. So you have a very real scenario where you get fast battleships and battlecruisers all operating at 28 knots for the Royal Navy in 1914, 1915. Now that's interesting. Now this is going to have an impact on the wider world because A, it's going to give the British an extra 15-inch gunship. And for those wondering, it's, well, to my mind, and I will say this, the odds are, if Tiger is a 15-inch gunship, she ain't going to go anytime soon in the treaty period. She's going to last longer. I'm also going to say, I know there's already some ideas putting forward, well, the QEs get either triple turrets or they get the small tube boilers. I think the QEs get the small tube boilers, and I think potentially they retain 5 twin turrets. I think potentially they try and go for a 28-knot 10-gun design, and they probably end up with a 25, 26-knot 10-gun design. And I don't think they go for the triple turrets. Now, please bear with me on this while I make my case for it, okay? The thing is, the British usually like to test the things out on smaller ships before they put them in the big ships. It's very unusual that you see the triple turrets appear in the battleship line before they've been tested out elsewhere. But if you think about it, they have been tested out elsewhere. There have been the triple 4-inch mounts. The British have tested the triple 4-inch mounts. They haven't liked them, but they've learnt from them. Okay, and yes, it's very different. But they've already had a triple mount in service before they put a triple turret in service. Okay? Bear with me. The British have been testing out small tube boilers at this point. They haven't been testing out triple turrets. So I don't think it's going to be triple turret. It's going to be triple turrets. I think it will be small tube boilers. And so I think you could end up with the Queen Elizabeth all having Yarrow small tube boilers. Now, are they the same small tube boilers you have post World War II and all those things? No. But they're still a lot more efficient than the boilers which the Queen Elizabeth class have. Again, it's nothing which isn't ordered at about the same time as Agincourt is ordered, as I've talked about before, the 6th Queen Elizabeth. So, yeah. It would be interesting. It would be interesting. It would be very interesting to see what happens and how the things develop and how the various options take place, because I think for the Royal Navy, you've basically pushed the battlecruisers on a generation, because again it's only 3 changes, but that's not really accelerated. This won't have accelerated anything that much. Again, think about it, go back to this in the pace of ordering. We're basically saying we order a Tiger in Queen Mary's period, so it's a year earlier. And again, if you look at the text put into Tiger versus those, but they're all available at this point. So again, you're not really pushing these things that much. And as a Tiger, you order something which has got 15-inch 42s. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is she's ordered in April 1911, earlier than traditionally the 15-inch 42 to question is taken. So she might not be. She could still be another 13.5-inch gun ship. But again, she's not laid down till after the decision's been taken, and there are designs. There are designs for a 15-inch Tiger. You know, I've read notes and things, as Drac and others have read notes talking about them. So, yeah. this is an option. And if it is the option you go through, that's going to have an impact on things. That is going to have a big impact on things. This leads us into World War One. Now, the Battle of Dogger Bank, as we know, takes place in 1915. And it historically involves 5 battlecruisers from the British side. 5. And those 5, well, involve 2 12-inch Indefatigables. New Zealand and Indomitable. Well, actually, no. They involve New Zealand and Indomitable, which is Indomitable, of course, being an invincible class, and New Zealand being one of the Indefatigables. Now, there is a reason I'm about to say what I'm going to say, because if you have 13.5-inch gunships, and you have 6 of them, or even 5 of them, and you have a 15-inch gunship, the odds are you're going to be doing everything you can to make sure that's your force structure available for this kind of battle. So whilst you might still have a single 12-inch battlecruiser taking part, the odds are you don't. Or if you do, it's sitting in 2nd Squadron, and it's sitting far away, because it's going to be slow. The thing is, the British battlecruiser force, if they're the newer ships, are 28-knot ships. The older ones, Indomitable, etc., they are the slow ships. They're the ones capable of 25.5 knots. They're the ones which are limiting the top speed. They're the ones which keep the British very much in touch with their German counterparts. And that's a problem. The Battle of Dogger Bank is a battle which has so much in it and going on in it. So many operations going on in it. But realistically, the British can't close as fast as they want to without leaving behind 2 of their ships. The Germans have 4. Blucher, Moltke, Seydlitz and the Flinger, of which 3 really count. So realistically, Blucher is supposed to be meat for the 2 12-inch gunships, and Moltke, Seydlitz and the Flinger are supposed to be meat for the 13.5-inch gunships. But, and I say this as a big, glorious Gluteus Maximus of this topic, if you now have 4 ships or 5 ships there which can do 28 knots, one of which is probably armed with 15-inch guns in the case of Tiger, what are the odds that you do more damage? That you pick to go into the fight, how do I put this, more aggressively, but use your speed to dominate them? Because the Germans are going to have 2.5 knot speed disadvantage. If they get caught, they're gonna try running, but if one moment they're in firing range, they're not shaking you. Not unless they can run home. And this is before we get into the whole Queen Elizabeth thing. Because if the Queen Elizabeth class have come out as being 28 knot fast battleships because they've gone with an 8-gun arrangement like they went with Tiger, but have been happy to keep the speed up, so they've got 28 knot fast battleship for the Queen Elizabeths, then you most certainly will have multiple 28 knot ships here, because they will be together. It will be far harder for Jellicoe to make the case to keep the 28 knot ships out of the battlecruiser force. And that could be really interesting, because, again, if we go to the Queen Elizabeth class, and They're a good class. They are. There you go. There's my notes. Well, if we consider when they come into service and when this takes place, you could theoretically, again, I'm emphasizing this as theoretically, because Dogger Bank takes place in January 1915, theoretically have Queen Elizabeth herself there. Theoretically, she comes into December 1914. She's a 28-knot ship, and you have Queen Elizabeth, Tiger, and the rest of them are 13.5-inch gun ships, and they're all doing 28 knots. That is when Dogger Bank becomes a bit of a sticky wicket. There's also not a scenario where the Royal Navy lets that happen, and there isn't a very senior Second Admiral there. A very capable Second Admiral. And this is the thing about the Battle of Dogger Bank. Realistically, George Warrender is a Vice Admiral. He's supposed to be supporting the first Battlecruiser Squadron, but he's nowhere near there. So he's not part of it. And so realistically, we have 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron, which is under the Rear Admiral of 2nd Battlecruiser Squadron, who's Sir Archibald Moore. And Moore, God love him, he'd served as 3rd Sea Lord 1912 to 1914. You'd expect someone who's a former 3rd Sea Lord to be slightly more able to do slightly more than he did. But he is the one who decides to just concentrate on Blucher and smashing up Blucher. However, if we go to Queen Elizabeth, and we go, well, who are they going to put in charge of a Queen Elizabeth class ship? Who are they going to put in charge of them in this period? Again, we are probably talking a decent officer. Probably a capable officer. Now, in this period, and when we're specifically talking about in Dogger Bank is interesting because, of course, it takes place on the 24th of January. 15th Battle Squadron at that point is under the command of... 5th Battle Squadron is under command of someone called Alexander Bethnal. And Bethnal is a Vice Admiral. He is also an absolutely, and I would say this, arrogant SOB. He is a former Director of Naval Intelligence. He is exactly who you would put in charge of these sort of things, which are primary assets. So here is the thing. If BT has something like something like the Seoul fast battleship with him, he's probably going to have Alexander Bethnal there. And good luck with that. That's my sort of running theory of it. You might want Sturdy, but he's off doing other things at this point. He's off dealing with other problems, other things. He won't be there. But Alexander Bethnal is the guy who's chosen to basically oversee and watch various things to do the Queen Elizabeth class program. So the odds are he is there. And you probably want Bethnal more than you want Sturdy. Because Bethel's a former Director of Naval Intelligence, and if he has an argument with BT over, if BT sends out a wrong signal, he's going to look at it, go, "Are you sure you meant to send that signal, sir? Do you think you might have set up the wrong flags, sir? Might you want to correct your command, sir?" Or alternatively, he'll put signal, "Fleet, act on me," and will interpret BT's signal in such a way BT will claim, "Oh yes, he did exactly the thing I meant him to do." And he'll go, Yeah, the guy signaled this. I did what I wanted. Battle of the Wills, Arrogance Edition. Winner, former director, Naval Intelligence. Yeah! You have to remember, Directors of Naval Intelligence, because of the way the British, the Royal Navy had basically set up their staff structure prior to World War II, Directors of Naval Intelligence had basically been the functional head of all of the staff structure of the Admiralty. Anything which wasn't to do with the Third Sea Lord's office had gone through the Director of Naval Intelligence. So Bethel is a guy who had been used to pretty much running the Royal Navy. He'd have the Lords giving him instructions for what they wanted to do operationally, and he would go and do it. He was basically the Third Sea Lord equivalent for operations and everything that was actually done by the Royal Navy. So, yes. And again, Hood was off doing other interesting things at this point. That's why Horace Hood isn't there. Horace Hood gets pulled back to basically watch BT later on in the war. He's doing other things. Downside, we won't be able to blame the Doctor for the Admiral for the Doctor's internet issues. Yeah. The interesting thing then again is this battle. If you consider the Germans pulling away, if the British have a load of 28-knot ships, the Germans aren't pulling away. If they aren't pulling away, then the Battle of Dogger Bank gets very interesting. There's also the fact that if you have Tiger there, and you had Queen Elizabeth, if you have two 15-inch gun ships there, considering their range of engagement, and the opening range was 18,000 yards, yeah, it's not going to be good for the Germans. There is a very real scenario in this battle. They end up losing a lot more than Blucher. And there is a very real scenario where this becomes and it got worse scenario. Because you could quite easily end up with a force. As I said, this force structure could be two 15-inch gun ships and three 13.5-inch gun ships all doing 28 knots. And that means, let's say it's Tiger and Queen Elizabeth which match up with Moltke and Seydlitz and go, hello. Again, you're going to have to deal with the gunnery. But again, the gunnery of Queen Elizabeth was always pretty darn good and basically had the latest in direct fire control. Tiger was never that bad. Neither was Princess Royal, which was there. So yeah, and I don't think if New Zealand is still a lucky ship, that's going to be problematic for them with 13.5-inch guns. So realistically, you're talking about a massive firepower advantage. Now, of course, there is the potential option that the Germans, in response to the British having these increased battlecruiser capabilities, have actually sacrificed battleship construction to build more battlecruisers. There is an option that. And that will change things dramatically, but I consider that a very low likelihood. Whereas the likelihood of ending up with a 15-inch Tiger and a 28-knot Queen Elizabeth is far less. Now, it is far less. It's far more likely and far less unlikely to happen. And if it was Queen Elizabeth class, as I said, I think the option is going to be they're probably going to go small tubes. The question is going to be, do they go for a 10-gun ship or an 8-gun ship? If they try to go for a 10-gun ship, you're not going to have a 28-knot Queen Elizabeth, but you're going to have a 25, 26-knot ship with 10 guns. And can we all think about how that has an impact on the treaty system? Because a Queen Elizabeth class with 10 guns and 26 knots, 10, 15-inch guns and 26 knots is going to be a much bigger threat. And you have to remember again, the 15-inch shells were some of the more reliable ones in this time period. 13.5-inch shells aren't that bad either. I think the problem for the Germans is if the battlecruisers get wiped out, what does that affect on the rest of the war? How does it impact the rest of the war? And that's what I'm going to discuss about for the rest of the rest of this video, because realistically, this is the point. The Germans' limitations on their building, as said, is the budget versus the Navy. That's their limitation versus the budget of the Navy versus the Army. And so I don't think they're really going to push themselves that far. They either abandon their battlecruiser program when the British are building so many lines, in which case the British possibly don't even build Tiger. They probably do, but they probably possibly don't. And they concentrate on battleships and they go fast battleship route, or they build exactly as they did historically. As said, my instinct is they build historically because that's what Tirpitz and Wilhelm will probably want them to do. In which case, they have a problem. They have a very big problem. Because if the Battle of Dogger Bank turns out as... And I've run this on a couple of simulations, a couple of different pieces of software to test out. And realistically, if you have a fast battleship, and UAD, I have to admit, I did it 2 15-inch gun fast battleships and 3 13.5-inch battle cruisers, all capable of 28 knots. So that was the conversion, because UAD doesn't really like you putting multiple designs of battlecruiser in a sort of pre-range fight. I ran it through, and realistically, the firepower advantage gets pretty intense. If they manage to knock out any of the major ships earlier on, and I'm talking anything but Blucher early on, then the Germans end up in massive trouble. Because the temptation is going to be, especially if it's damaged, to try and slow down to protect it. And if the Germans slow down at any point, then they get mauled. Now, admittedly, again, the British have Beatty in command, and the trouble is that Beatty's going to use this as his thing to make himself sound massive if he annihilates the German 1st Scouting Group. But again, if you annihilate the 1st Scouting Group, that's going to create a problem for the Germans. What are they going to do? If you don't have 1st Scouting Group, do you come out for the rest of the war? Do you actually try and come out and fight the British? Probably not. You probably, in a nice way, without 1st Scouting Group, how are you going to run any of your traps? How are you going to run any of your raids? If we consider the raids on Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby, they take place in 1914. If in January 1915, the British annihilate the ships which did that, what is everyone going to think? Now, admittedly, the Germans are left with some battlecruisers, don't get me wrong. Even if they lose those 3, then they still have Von der Tann, and they have the 2nd De Flinger, and the 3rd De Flinger being built. So they probably try and get them finished off. But the point is, they've also lost a lot of senior officers. They've lost capable commanding officers. That's more of a problem. Because if you lost Hipper, that's bad. You lose Hebbinghaus as well, who's the Contra-Admiral, or Rear Admiral equivalent, in charge of the cruisers group, the light cruisers, the 2nd Scouting Group. That's also bad. They have some torpedo boats, etc. But the thing is, again, and the point is, if you, considering the light cruiser force you have under William Goodenough, and the Harwich force which you have there, led by Reginald Tyrwhitt, 2 Commodores, backing up the British, if they are taking down the heavy ships, those ships are going to pile in. And the British have a lot more ships there to pile in than the Germans do. The British have 37 37 destroyers to the German 18. They have submarines hanging around there. The British have 7 light cruisers. 4 of them are towns. Okay? Not massive. Honestly, the fastest ship in the battle is still going to be, I think it's going to be the SMS Rostock, which is 29.3 knots, and she probably can get away, if she's allowed to get away. Because she probably gets drawn into the fight, and if she gets damaged, she ain't getting away at speed. And that's the problem. What survives of this force is going to be very interesting. The British are going to have losses. Don't get me wrong, I'm not claiming the British are going to be completely invulnerable in this fight. They're going to have losses. But the losses for the British are going to be manageable, because if they wipe out first scouting group, or near enough wipe it out, whatever they lose is not going to affect them as much as it affects the Germans. And for the British, at a certain point, it also becomes a case, do they start reversing the strategy? Does the Battle of Jutland change in that, do the British start reversing the strategy? Instead of them waiting on the Germans to raid them, do they go raid the Germans? Because the thing is, if you got the Queen Elizabeth's coming, 5th Battle Squadron, and their fast battleships coming in, even if they are 26 knots, 10 gun ships rather than 28 knot 8 gun ships, coming in, do you as the Royal Navy start going, shall we take our 28 knot battle cruisers out, and shall we start wrecking the German coast? Yes, they've got a minefield, but we've got mine layers. We can mine layers of minesweepers. We can penetrate this. Do you start harassing them? The British start doing naughty things up and down the German coast to basically terrorize them. And because suddenly that whole thing of what happens if we lose the battlecruiser fleet becomes, well, yeah, then we're limited to a battle fleet, which is the same size, which is still bigger than the German one. Again, I will remind you, the British have more battleships dreadnought battleships at the Battle of Jutland than the Germans have battle cruisers, dreadnought battleships, and pre-dreadnought battleships combined. If you take out from the Battle of Jutland's force structure, in terms of the Germans, if you take out from them, well, historically, at Jutland, they have the Flinger, Seydlitz, and Moltke are all part of their force at Jutland. If you've taken them out, they have Lutzow and von der Tann, which are good ships, again. And they probably don't have Hipper, so they have down to Lutzow and von der Tann as their battle cruiser scouting group. Again, it gets just as bad once you start looking at their light cruisers and their other forces. If you take them out in this battle, that's going to have a huge impact on the German force structure and the German capabilities. So I think it would change World War I quite dramatically. Now, is this me stacking the aces on the side of the Royal Navy? I often get this accused me. I'm going, no. It's one small change. And I can understand the logic behind what the British do and why they advise the Dominions to build what they do. Because they're looking at the problem as is. But again, it comes back to a force generation thing. And, as said, a development thing. Instead of New Zealand and Australia being batch 2 Indefatigables, they're batch 2 Lions. Will they have as many modifications as historically to get to Queen Mary? No, but let's be honest, they'll be closer to Queen Mary than they will be Lion. Probably, in their design. In which case, That's going to push them forward. That's going to push forward the existing Queen Mary, because she'll be an evolution from them, rather than evolution from Lion. She's going to be an evolution from what they are. And then Tiger's going to be an evolution on from Queen Mary. And this is my point about Tiger ending up being a 15-inch gun version of itself. That makes a lot of sense. Again, that's fitting with the construction as they did. And then that has the impact, as said, on Dogger Bank. Because the likelihood is, if 15-inch guns aren't new when the Queen Elizabeths are ordered, if 15-inch guns are not new when the Queen Elizabeth orders because they've already been ordered for Tiger, and I'm not sure why people keep trying to make it a 14-inch special rather than a 13.5-inch special. I have no idea where that one keeps coming from, but yeah, we'll leave that to one side on that 15-inch gun development program. And this is going to be the really interesting thing, because to my mind, it changes things to an extent, but it could well, especially if the battle is a battle dominated by the Battlecruiser, the heavily armed ship, especially if the Royal Navy ships are felt to have shrugged off the damage of the enemy, especially, and if it's going to be more interesting is if Tiger comes through and Queen Elizabeth comes through, basically are both in the battle and they're virtually they've shrugged off all the damage, and some of the older ships have still got damage but survived. Then that is going to have the impact of, oh well, if we're ordering next generation ships, perhaps we ordered a fast battleship again. Is it going to be a 20-knot ship? Probably somewhere in those regions. But it depends. It depends a lot on who's in charge, because you're going to have, the trouble is Fisher's back in charge. And Fisher's obsessed with Battlecruiser 2 words. That's his dream. Hood, the Admiral class are not actually ordered due to any realistic data on their viability. They're ordered by a man who is obsessed with an ideological position, not a reality. I think the big problem you have, though, also, is if Dogger Bank becomes the battle which decides World War I at sea. If Dogger Bank becomes the biggest battle you have in the North Sea, there is a problem. Because you think about all the lessons learned at Jutland that affect World War II, night fighting, all sorts of things that come from World War II come from Jutland. And if Dogger Bank actually causes and is a decisively conclusive victory, so as such that Jutland never happens, or no battle like Jutland happens, then that can lead to a lot of follow-on issues for World War II. Because a lot of lessons aren't learned. And that's one of those interesting things in history when you start thinking about it. Because sometimes you sit there and go, this event was horrible, but if this hadn't been learnt by this period and this point, it could have been so much worse later on. So much worse later on. And that's sometimes something weird to say, but it's the case. Now, with that all being said, I'm going to go to this, stick that up here, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. And I'm going to start going through questions. And I'm going to make sure the questions live button, no questions are open button is up. And don't take this the wrong way. I'm also going to put a fill out while questions are coming in. I'm going to take a quick bite of my pizza, which has now gone cold. It's gone cold, but as you can see, I did put stop it sticking to the bottom, sticking to the pizza tray. I stuck corn flour on it. It's worked for some remarkably well. The tray we've got probably needs to be replaced, but it's like a long list of things at the moment. I am currently spending most of my money on things like boards for an attic and books and bookshelves and toilets and those things. So buying a new pizza pan is not exactly high on my list. So corn flour works just as well as getting a new one. And I was asked the other day by someone, why do I discuss all this on the channel? I said because I want to normalise people being adults. And there is an idea put forward by some people, I'm not going to name names, on YouTube and various places, where basically you get to live in a state of permanent, and I do mean permanent, childhood, where you get to just put your money in on fun things and you don't have to spend money on reality. The car does matter, but I haven't heard back from the mechanic about the car yet. The mechanic's still trying to assess the car. I'll give him a phone tomorrow and see. We will see. But as I said, get the questions in. The bot's working. The one problem with the corn flour is it gets everywhere. It works on making it slide off and not stick to the pan. But it does go everywhere. And I look like I'm doused with snow. But in terms of channel, will this development of Battlecruiser fleet make the army intervene sooner? I presume you mean on the German side. It's going to depend on what they do, right? If they keep to their historical plan, they're okay until they historically weren't. Okay? Nothing changes. If they try and put more money in it, if they try and start bumping things up, if they try and do the things they could do as options, anything which starts to increase the cost of the ships is going to cause trouble. And the thing is, how do they stop the army intervening? Well, historically, they basically cannibalize. They don't build cruisers, and they basically don't build. They don't build as large destroyers in as large numbers as they can build them, because they don't want to push up the cost. Remember, I did a video on building the fleets for Jutland, and it was a fun video to do. But what it very quickly reveals to you is that not sure why I was connected to Brewship Stage at that point. We'll leave that one side. It's that the Royal Navy is dealing with all sorts of interesting issues, but are still building a balanced fleet. The Kaiserlich Marine isn't able to build a balanced fleet at a certain point, because if they want to keep up with the top market items, they have to cut. And that's why at the Battle of Jutland, the British have an overwhelming cruiser advantage. They have an overwhelming destroyer advantage over and above the proportions of the rest of the fleet. And you sit there and go, okay, And the British are able to do that, as well as have things off doing other things. And they have a huge amount of destroyers off doing other jobs. They have a huge amount of cruisers off doing other jobs. The British leave Queen Elizabeth class and R-class battleships behind. Well, R-class battleships behind. And other things behind Jutland, because their gunnery isn't up to standard yet. Not because they're not commissioned. They're commissioned, they're supposed to be fully worked up. But their gunnery standards haven't met Jellicoe's line, so he leaves them behind. That's the thing at the Battle of Jutland. And that Germans are in that situation principally because they've had to try and keep below a level on the budget. So, yeah, I think, honestly, it's going to depend on what they do, but probably they carry on as historically did, and so they end up with a little bit of a differential. They end up with the British having 2 more 13.5-inch gun ships and 2 less 12-inch gun ships, and it's... Is it going to change a lot? Probably. What's it realistically going to change? The 4th generation on the British side, and probably the choice of what ships are in the Battlecruiser force. HMS Vernon. How hilarious is HMS New Zealand, the scenario, given its divine protection, having it with 30.5-inch guns? You do feel kind of cruel to people. New Zealand is the kind of ship which walks into an absolute smattering of artillery fire, comes out and goes, I do believe you've scratched my paintwork. No, that's where a seagull went. Sorry. New Zealand is special. She is special. But as I've said, I'm currently on a running thing where I think the Royal Navy needs to get all their ships blessed by tribes from around the world. Because so far, every time they've done those ships to get, they'll disturbingly do disturbingly well. Oh, there's all sorts of other ships as well. There's ships left behind for refit. There's ships left behind for... their gunnery's not up to stuff. There's ships left behind which are just literally how are in the process of commissioning. Yeah. Lions, stop suggesting that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing which would cause a war in Warhammer 40k. Nice thing. With a fleet of 1 Tiger, 1 Queen Mary, 4 Lions, 1 Indefatigable, and 3 Invincibles, won't that easily negate the loss at Jutland without the fact that Renan and Repulsor coming? It depends what the losses are at Jutland. As said, you're talking about Jutland, you have to get past Dogger Bank first. And Dogger Bank is going to be very different. And the more different Dogger Bank is, the more of an impact you're going to have on Jutland. Because that's the way it's going to build up. And that's going to have an impact on other things. If Tiger has an 8-inch, 15-inch 42 guns, what a knock-on for Queen Elizabeth. You would think they wouldn't keep them the same number of guns. Also, triple turrets or another twin. Well, they might go for 28 knots. 8 15-inch guns. They might, if they think it'll get them 28 knots. They might go for 10 guns with another twin, and basically scale up to 26 knots. Because again, you have to remember, the gun layout on the Queen Elizabeth class is another thing they're changing. They've gone from 10 guns to 8 guns. And the British go with a 10-gun scenario, but small tube boilers. And so they're doing 26 knots. Then you've got a 26-knot, 10-gun Queen Elizabeth class. That's interesting. That as a basis is very interesting. That's going to make it longer, which is going to, again, length to beam ratio, that's going to increase your length. And it's going to allow all sorts of interwar things, because again, the British could do what the Italians do. They could drop a turret to go increase speed. It's also going to have an impact on the R-class design. Again, if small tube boilers are the way the British are, if small tube boilers, if you introduce the small tube boilers in the Queen Elizabeths, there as a big change development to see how fast you can get them truly fast battleships. Then suddenly the R's are probably going to get small tube boilers as well. And that's going to affect that class's capability and performance. And that has all sorts of knock-on. Again, we haven't talked about this, but let's say, war could unfold as much as it did historically. You could have a Battle of Dogger Bank, which could be a victory. It could have some sort of Battle of Jutland scenario, which could still happen because the British are raiding and the Germans come out to challenge the British raiding and those sort of things. Could have this happen. You could end up with a Washington Treaty. But if the British have got, by that point, 10 15-inch gun battleships, each capable of 28 knots, and 3 battlecruisers with 15-inch guns, of which one's 28 knots and 2 are 32 knots, and HMS Hood coming in and whatever, and the Admiral class turn out to be in this scenario, and that's going to be a slightly different thing for the Americans, because there's one thing having a 21-knot standard battle fleet, when you, as a treaty agreed limit, under the scenario you had historically, where most of your ships have 14-inch guns and they have 15-inch guns, and then mostly not that much faster. But if you're a 21-knot standard battle fleet, and the British are a 28-knot standard battle fleet, because the British have standardized on 15-inch guns and 28 knots, that's a scary scenario. So all these things have problems. Again, if the British are, if Queen Elizabeth class, even if they are 26 knot, consistently 26 knot, that is a problem enough for a 21 knot battle fleet. That's a 5 knot advantage for the British battle fleet versus the American one. That's as we talked about before. 3 knots allows you to dictate range of engagement and pace and time of engagement. 2.5 knots is enough to make getting out of battle very, very difficult to impossible. 5 knot speed advantage for your fleet in combat operations? That's practically suicidal to engage. The R's wouldn't get triple turrets, but they would get small troop boilers. The R's might also still go 10, 15-inch 42s. So the R's and Queen, basically you could get the R's and the Queen both coming out with 10, 15-inch 42s. The thing is, that might affect the Renowns, and that the Renowns might end up, again, dropping a turret to gain speed, and having some jiggery pokery, but you could end up the R's having the Renown and Repulse having 8 15-inch guns and 32 knots. Take care, Time Lord. And that has an impact. All this has an impact. It's one very minor change. If you think about it historically, it's one minor change. New Zealand and Australia, when they're looking at the options, are guided towards the Lions rather than the Indefatigables. And as said, the real terms cost them is not differential enough that it's going to be, because I've budgeted 2.1 million. Historically, the New Zealand spent 1.8 million roughly, so it's 300,000 extra for them, and it's 100,000 extra for Australia. It's really not a lot of extra money in terms of what capability you're getting. And there is all sorts of options which can come through. There's all sorts of options. The reason I keep ruling out with the triple turrets is because, again, the British, until they've got the triple 4-inch mount, I don't think they're going to go for a triple turret design. Until they've tested something which is a triple gun layout, they're not going to go pushing for it. Because the Royal Navy is so conservative, so almost absurdly conservative when it comes to design and procurement in this period. So almost absurdly conservative. Here's one. How did the French, Austrian, Hungarian, and Italians respond? Austro-Hungarians are more concentrated in the Italians, so they're probably going to be less involved in this. The French are, as said, still rebuilding themselves after the June of Coal. The Italians. That's going to be interesting. Because the Francesco Caracciola, if we have the Francesco Caracciola design put forward, then probably they're pushing a bit harder. Alright. But it's also going to depend on what the Queen Elizabeths are. Again, because if you've got a 28-knot fast battleship and a 28-knot battlecruiser, and the British are probably going to look at it and go, oh, sexy. That's going to mean everyone else is going to look at the fast battleship and go, ooh, should we? Because again, let's put it this way: if in 1914 you suddenly have in the world a 28-knot fast battleship with 8 15-inch guns and the same similar armoring and profile as the Queen Elizabeth had historically, let's think about what people are going to be putting on paper. I have a 21-knot battle fleet. Cute. The British have a 7-knot advantage over you. The British fast battleships have a 7-knot advantage. That's disturbing. That's overtaking at speed. That's a case of, oh, frigate, we have to rebuild our battle line speed. If the British are 10 guns and 26 knots for the Queen Elizabeth class, and you have Tiger going around with 8 15-inch guns and 28 knots, then honestly the Francesco Caracciola should probably get a little bit more effort put into them, because they're going to see how the world's going, and the Italians are going to expect everyone else to jump in there soon, and they're going to want to get there second, because let's be honest, the race isn't for first place. Everyone knows usually it's going to be the British setting the pace, because the British have got the money and the budget and the throughput. Again, I point you to this earlier construction list, as historically was happening. This is what we have going on with battle cruiser construction. The sheer volume of construction going through. The British have an advantage and chance of getting there first because they're producing so many, they should get there first. But, and I say this is the big, glorious glutinous maximum of this, getting there second matters. And for the Italians, if they can get one of the Francesco Caracciolas in service as quickly as they possibly can, then that's going to give them some advantages. Lions, I know you keep having this idea of a 26-knot, 12, 15-inch Queen Elizabeth class battleship. I know you do. But it's a beautiful idea, but it's just not going to happen at that time. It could happen. There is a triple turret design in Vickers. There's all sorts of triple turrets going around, but the Royal Navy isn't going to adopt them until they've already got them themselves. Because they are nuts and absurdly conservative. With a 7-knot advantage, you can cross the T whenever you want to. Technologically, Fisher, they could have been built there. How does that change history? It doesn't really help the British. Well, it does, but it doesn't. It makes the case now that battleships are about speed rather than about firepower. And to be honest, it makes the British seem a little French, because that's honestly what the French are doing. The French are going for going for more guns on the smaller caliber because they can't build to make up for the fact they can't get the bigger guns. And the British know the American 14-inch guns are coming, and they know the 16-inch guns are coming. They're developing the guns themselves. They've got a 15-inch gun line, they've got a 16.5-inch gun line, they've probably got an 18-inch gun line going and developing. So, realistically, whilst 28 knots is an advantage, dropping down that much, dropping down to 12, 13.5-inch guns, it doesn't help the British out, really. It doesn't help the British out. It doesn't give them the status they need. It's interesting enough. 8 15-inch guns and 26 knots of speed, 26 knots of speed. 15-inch guns and whatever gives them the status because it's the size of gun. You have to remember, again, Orion was called a super dreadnought because you had 13.5. Everyone else had 12, 11-inch guns. You need to be jumping up above that to have the status. Otherwise, you're just another Orion-level ship. A very powerful Orion-level ship, but just another Orion-level ship. And its status is a big part of the capital ships. There is a reason why capital ships are called capital ships. They are capital assets. They are your capital status symbols. They're symbols of your nation's strength. Speed is useful. Firepower is status at this point. With a bigger victory in January against the sort of first scanner group, you might send more ships to Gallipoli. You might send more ships, but you probably don't. They've sent Queen Elizabeth. They've sent a whole load of pre-dreadnoughts and Lord Nelsons, etc. They have all sorts of capabilities there. Realistically, they probably don't send more ships, but they might be more willing to take losses. This is the thing: if you've annihilated first scouting group, you probably don't necessarily send more resources to Gallipoli, but you might be more prepared to accept losses at Gallipoli to win. So that's more likely what you do. Yes, Carl, Superfiring Triples do give a status for Tegetovs. But they're versus the Italians. And they're part of that qualified race, and when you look sort of when they are. For the British, their peers are the Americans. The Germans. That's who they are racing. So the Italians, as I said, are part of the qualitative race. This is the thing, is Britain's status is dependent upon it being the first amongst equals of the maritime powers. And it has to maintain that status. And that status in this period, comes from the size of your guns. If you're a secondary power, you can, in terms of maritime capability, you can set all sorts of things and still maintain your status. If you're the first power, you have to be the first power. It's the problem. If you are the best, you always have to be the best. You don't have any choice. Might as well. Include 28 not 18-inch gun Agincourt to mix. Do the Germans even dare to come out and play? No. Oh, they probably wander along, but if you've lost first scouting group, then they definitely don't. But the odds are they're coming out because a lot of their warfighting emphasis was based on the British being stupidly over-aggressive. Do you realize the Germans and the Japanese both have the same policy, that their opponents are going to be stupidly overly aggressive, so they're going to come fight us? When they don't, that's when they get into trouble. Now, if you're kidding, if after this a third battlecruiser squadron gets sent to work with the Harwich Force, and so they consistently have their backup, then honestly, that probably helps them in some of their operations. But realistically, it more provides them with a covering force. The bigger problem they're going to have is you have the Invincible class along, you're going to have at least the Rear Admiral with them. And Turret's a Commodore. And so, who's going to be in charge of the operations? Not Turret. And that's a big problem for the Harwich Force. One of the advantages the Harwich Force has is because of who's in charge of them and how they're acting. So if you stick bigger assets with them, bigger assets come with more senior officers. More senior officers would want to be in charge. It's not a scenario where Rear Admiral goes, you know what, the Commodore is usually running the Harwich Force, I'll let them do it. No, they're going to be wanting to run it, things. Look at the Battle of Dogger Bank. The Harwich Force are technically providing some of the light cruisers and the destroyers for the Battle of Dogger Bank. It's not the Battlecruiser Force. It's not their destroyers aren't with them. And so BT's in charge, not Turret. Not sure. Airliners have fuselage structures to get different sizes from ones that are designed with more or fewer sections. Why don't we see this with warships? We do. Not sure. We do. It's rarer because usually the hull form dictates a lot more with ships. But as I've talked about before, all BAE ships are designed. All BAE design ships these days are designed with a position in roughly in the middle of the ship, which you can cut them down and add in a section if you want to. And that's part of their future-proofing. So in elsewhere, the Type 26s can be stretched. But also, there is also the reality that governments tend to not like doing these things because there is a theory it produces a weakness in the hull. And that can produce issues. There is a theory that it can produce issues in terms of loading for the ship. And in historical terms, there's the fact also you have to work a lot on stability and the hull depth as well. So hulls are, because they pass through water, which is a very different fluid than air, for purposes of their operation, it can have an impact on you, on how you approach these things. Okay? And it does affect what you're going to design them with and how you're going to stretch them. And airplane fuselages tend to be a far more consistent shape along them. Tend to be a far more consistent shape than hulls, which tend to have far more overall changing. They don't tend to be straight lines in terms of warships. They tend to be more like modelled on fish and fatter in certain parts and thinner in others and wandering all over the place. I think I've discussed this several points now, channel, how the Queen Elizabeth class would evolve. I reckon small tube boilers, and they'd either go for a 10-gun arrangement, 10-15-inch gun arrangement, or they go for an 8-15-inch 10-gun arrangement aiming for 26 knots, or a 8-gun arrangement ranging for 20 knots, aiming for 28 knots. If you go for 28 knots, you have a convergence between the battlecruisers and the fast battle and the battleship line. And that has the biggest impact for what comes next. Because it could mean you don't have to choose. You don't have to choose. And that could have a real impact on the admirals, because imagine if you design an admiral class, but you design it as a fast battleship the whole way up. Not a battlecruiser, 2 words. Not something you try to adapt into a battlecruiser, 1 word, but is not as strong, not as dense a battlecruiser as HMS Tiger is. This is why I say HMS Tiger is actually, if the admiral class had followed on from Tiger's design stream, they'd have been about an extra 6,000 tons, roughly. So we're talking 48,000 ton standard displacement rather than 42-ish. That's a big difference. A big, big difference. It's a fun thing to think about. So, imagine what a fast battleship, and again, aiming for possibly 30 knots. Maybe they don't go for the full 32 knots. Maybe they're aiming for a 30-knot fast battleship in that design. And I think then even whatever lessons come out of any sort of Jutland-style scenario, you still get that thing kind of completed, because you don't need to upgrade it. It's already a fast battleship. It's already got the armor and coverage. You're just going, oh, we've proved we were right. And if you don't need to do any modifications, you probably have all 4 built by the end of World War I. Or at least closing to it, so you'll get all 4 finished off, which means the British would have 4 of those monsters, plus the 2 Renowns, plus the 5 R's, the 5 Queen Elizabeths. And also you might not even have the Renowns in this scenario, because you might have just completed the R's, because they're all 20-knot, perhaps all 28-knot ships. In which case you have, 13 28-knot ships? Plus Tiger with 15-inch guns, so 14 28-knot ships with 15-inch guns, and 4 30-knot ships with 15-inch guns. And at that point, 18 such ships. That's a fairly scary force for working out treaty agreements, and especially the British going, no, we need 16-inch gun ships as well because you have them. Yeah, people are going to. That's going to be that's a treaty-changing scenario. There is always the Fisher factor, but Fisher, you have to remember, Fisher believes he has to compromise on armor to get speed. If he's got visible proof in front of him that he doesn't have to compromise on armor, it's kind of like with superfiring. He doesn't believe superfiring is viable until he sees it with his own eyes. If he sees he can get armor and speed, the man is going to be... well, he's going to be overhyped, oversexed, and over here. To quote the phrase about the Americans in World War II. That was put around by the Germans to try and cause morale issues in the British home front. It didn't cause morale issues at the British home front. Mostly because, and I will say this, whilst there is a lot of talk about what American GIs get up to in various things, the fact is the American army kept them so busy training most of the time that most of them didn't have the energy to do anything. Greenwell, with an extra year of Dow Jones coming into play, do torpedo bombers get developed in the time to use? Potentially. Potentially they do. Let's put it this way. If the Germans look like they're going to be hiding their fleet earlier on and not coming out to play, then torpedo bombers are going to be higher up the emphasis, as are things like carriers to support them. So yeah, that's it could be a year quicker or a year heavier emphasis. A challenge on, does this scenario lead to dominating a flagship scenario for some permutation of? Potentially, but potentially it also, as said, there is a scenario in my mind where if the admirals are built as fast battleships, then the Americans are so eager to recapitalize their capital ship fleet because it's considered so out of touch that you get no Washington Treaty. And then that changes all sorts of things. You to remind, would this in this timeline a 30-inch 30.5-inch 50 come to be? Probably it would be an upgrade to a 14-inch 45. and the British would probably upgrade. That would be probably the scenario because of Vickers being Vickers. The British prefer the 45 because of its refit rate and its wear out rate compared to the 50. That's it. The British are looking at... The reason the British go with the 45 over the 50 is quite literally because for them the range differential doesn't matter as much as the fact that how often they have to replace the barrels. When you're operating around the world, that has an impact. It's basically the case of, yes, the 50 gives you a better gun. The 45 gives you a more usable gun in terms of it's available for longer before you have to replace it. And that's the British theory anyway. Once you start getting supercharging all sorts of things, and it ends up being, yeah, its own issues. Knight 6, won't the losses to submarine attack and low freeboard issues still be identified in this timeline even with trainers? Yes. They'll still be affected, but as I said, no Battle of Jutland, no night fighting. Maybe those things are going to have an impact. I seem to have got through all the questions. Yes, I guessed you meant underwater protection, and I agree, yes. That would still probably come in. But again, if you look at it, the battleships, especially the battleships, tend to have better underwater protection than the battlecruisers. Knight, I'm guessing this is a question that you put in the chat, but I haven't done the Q&A in front of. Would the evolved Tiger based on Admiral class really have been better when you aren't seemingly accounting for the underwater protection issues and attempts to fix freeboard issues? Tiger has better freeboard anyway, but also she also has better underwater protection from the get-go. I would say, again, the point is Tiger is a battle cruiser and is solidly a battle cruiser. Alright, Sunday is the last live before Christmas. I'm going to put this up here now. It's going to be Sunday. And then there's going to be a live both the Saturday and Sunday after Christmas. I'm moving the Thursday live to the Saturday nights because Thursday is Christmas Day. Alright? I will be on Discord in a bit. I will possibly do some guerrilla Twitch streams on Boxing Day with computer games because it could reach the point where I am seeking peace and solace. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. There are recorded videos which will be recorded next few days, which will be going up over that period. It should be a lot of fun. Well, the Tiger class, that's the thing, Knight 6831. The Tiger class wouldn't be seen as good enough for the next generation of fast battleship. And so again, you've got the Queen Elizabeth class and you've got the Tiger class, and if you've gone with, if they're both 28 knots and the Admirals are therefore a continuation of the fast battleship line, then they're going to have better underwater protection. You're persisting with the idea the Admirals in this scenario would still be from the battlecruiser line. My theory is they'd be from the fast battleship line. Because if you have that as your capability, you might as well go for it. So it'd be more like a case of the Queen Elizabeths and the R-class and the improvements beyond that in terms of fast battleship design. Again, there's a very real chance in this scenario that you end up with both the Queen Elizabeth and the R's being fast battleships with 28 knot speeds. With, perhaps the R's dropping down to 8 15-inch guns, being 20 knots, because they can, with it, they can cross the T of anyone who's out there. And that's being used to the advantage. But we'd have to see what happened. So that being said, and having reached the end of the questions, I'm going to say thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I'm going to turn off the questions. Questions are now closed. Yay. I'll put NX in here as well. Yeah, the queue is now closed. That's good. That's well. And, yeah. The following tiger will probably be 30 knots stand without any doubt, because it gives a comfortable speed advantage. Well, that's the thing. You could, theoretically, if you're prepared to go up to 50,000 tons, you could probably build something on the technology if you've pushed it, if you've got jumped this many generations ahead. You're talking about building something which has got small trip boilers, all those things, which could be a 30-knot ship, 30-knot fast battleship. It's going to be a clunky way of getting the fast battleship, but it's going to be fast battleship. Hello. We okay? We're just being a bit nutty. Okay. Poodles being poodles. Oh. Alright. I will do that. Now everyone can see you pouring my seat. Oh, hey, caramba. Right. So, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed this live. As said, there'll be recorded videos appearing tomorrow. There is a special one for the Santa Claus as well tomorrow. Saturday's video is already logged in. Sunday brew ships are normal. I've got to record next Wednesday's video, which is going to be the two historians, and all those sorts of things. So hopefully everyone enjoy. Do not give in to the greedy little one. I gave in a little bit. Anyway, thank you very much. Take care, everyone, and thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. And again, it makes for a fun thing to think about, this one. Toodles, everyone. So it's over, so immediately you just start licking yourself. You are a wonderful companion, aren't you? Merry Christmas, everyone.